Hey, it's Tommy Gunn from Cracked Rabbit Gaming, and it's time to tackle the nightmare that is the autotile. These can be so confusing to wrap your head around, but I almost guarantee I can show you how they work and you will be able to understand them. And how am I going to do that? Well, bam! Not that. Color-coded autotiles. So this is such a big topic that I'm actually going to break this up into 3 parts. So in this video, I'm going to talk about what an autotile is and which part is used for each shape that you're making, the differences between all the different A tiles, so A1 through A5, and then counters, that is countertops, because there is a difference there, which you may not even know, and then talk about water borderlines, because with the water tiles, there's a little bit of a difference there too. Then in part 2, I'm going to show you how to create a seamless tile, just a regular square tile that is seamless. So if you already know how to do that, you can skip that video. And then in part 3, I'm going to show you how to build an auto tile. And that's going to go over all the little tricks and the order in which you should make each part of the auto tile to make sure that it tiles correctly and it is constructed the right way, and there aren't any seams, and the easiest, most efficient way to make them. So first of all, let's just talk about what an auto tile is. So if you go down to the bottom of the A tab and you just look at any of these tiles here, if you draw these out, these are just standard old tiles and nothing happens, nothing special. These are just, every square you draw is exactly the same. But if you go up to an auto tile, like this rug is a good example, and you draw this out, you'll notice that something different happens where there's actually a border all the way around this nice design, and no matter what I do, it'll always have that border going all the way around it. And it happens so seamlessly, and that you might not even realize that anything special is even happening, because it just seems so natural. Of course there's a border that goes around that, but to make that happen, you actually have to build your tiles in a specific way so that it all stitches together correctly. And of course the program does that for you, but you have to just make sure you're formatting your image correctly. So if we go and look at the RTP, then we can see these are, so the A2 tiles, these are the standard auto tiles. And actually, if you'll notice, these first ones on the very left just look all the same. There's nothing special going on about those. And it's kind of weird that they even have these in the auto tile slot. But if you look at the rugs that I was just showing you, then you can see that these have a specific format to them, and all the rest of these kind of follow the same thing, where it has this square at the bottom, then it has a tiny square here, and then it has sort of a plus sign in the upper right. And they all follow this basic thing. This one kind of looks the same here. So what these are is the top left, that's just a thumbnail. And so that's just how it looks in the editor here. So you can actually make the thumbnail whatever you want for the A2 tiles, for these first auto tiles. And I'll get to the differences in a minute. But so that thumbnail doesn't actually have to look like that. You can put anything you want there. But of course, it makes sense to just use what it would look like if you just placed one square down. And then you've got your main section here, and the plus sign. Well, let's just go to the color-coded auto tile, and then you'll see how that works. So if I go to my auto tile template here that I made, and I'll actually Let's see. So I have it open here, and also some other crappier autotiles that I've made. So as you can see, I have this thumbnail here that actually does not look like what this would look like if I just draw one square. If I just draw one square with this, it's all purple. So what it's doing is it's taking the four corners here and putting them together to make the single square. But my thumbnail just looks like a smaller version of this whole section here. And so let's go back here. So I've already got all these examples out here, but I can just draw some more. So you draw a single square here and it's all purple. If you stretch it out, it starts using the red section with the white arrows. And if I make this even bigger, then it starts using that CRG gray section. And then if I do a plus sign, you'll see it starts using these green pieces. And so if we go back and look at this tile, so I'll turn on my grid and you'll see that this grid is set to 32 by 32 pixels, which is what normal tiles are. But you'll notice that it's actually a little different. It's not just set up on a 32 by 32 grid. And if I turn on the actual grid in Photoshop, which you may or may not be able to see very easily, it's this blue color, then you'll see that this is actually set up on a 16 by 16 grid. So these corners are 16 by 16, these green ones are 16 by 16, and these red ones, they do stretch, but actually they do get divided on the 16 line. The only thing that doesn't ever get divided is this CRG, this middle section. That's the part that actually tiles all the way. So if you see all these examples that you can look at, the CRG is never divided up. It always looks the same. And actually, if you look at the grid, and if I turn on the grid here, you can see that it's actually not on the grid the way that you might think just from looking at it. It's actually offset because, well, if you look at this one, it's obvious why. It's because these purple corners are, taking up that 16, and then, yeah. So anyway. So yeah, this should give you a better idea of exactly how it's working. And of course, this is just for your understanding. This does not obviously stitch together seamlessly or anything like that. So you wouldn't actually want to. This is not going to necessarily help you make autotiles because you don't want to exactly follow these lines, because you need to get the way that the texture tiles correctly. Because as you can see, the red arrows, or the red section with the white arrows, those touch each other, which means they have to stitch together. And the purple sections always will touch each other, and so the purple has to stitch together with the other purple, but then also with the red and the white arrows, and the red with the white arrows have to touch each other, but they also have to touch the gray box. So I know this sounds complicated, and then you'll see the green is actually cutting the red with the white arrows and stuff like that. So yes, it seems very complicated, but when you're making them, thankfully, it's actually pretty easy to do if you do it in the right order. You don't really have to think about all of this stuff. You just have to follow the order that I'm going to show you in part 3, and that will just kind of make it all automatic. So let's talk about the differences between the tiles now. So here's A2. So these are just your standard tiles. The one difference here is that the right side, this right half of it, This actually has transparency, which is kind of hard to see in this image because it's just kind of the white color behind it, or not quite white. But these have transparency, or can. This, like as you see here, this one doesn't. But these ones on the left can't. And I'll show you in this test. So if I go up here and draw, whatever, something around here, or actually here, I'll use my tile here. So if I use this other, or this texture here, you'll see it's actually changing the shape and changing the pieces that are used on my other tile here. But if I use one of these ones on the right side that has transparency, this actually doesn't change anything. You'll see it looks like I'm just drawing this right on top of everything without anything else changing. And that's intentional. That's because this allows you to put, like in this case, these are these holes, so it allows you to put a hole in the tile without it putting a border around it, because that would look weird. You don't want, well, not that this is kind of strange, a giant hole in this rug. But yeah, you wouldn't want a border to be this gold border to start going around the hole. You want this hole to actually just be taking a chunk out of the rug. And so there's that. And I'll back up. So this is the A1. You can't see it. I'll move this down. So this is the A1 tiles, and usually it says in the image name. And what the A1 tiles are, you'll see 3 frames that look almost identical. So these are actually animations. So they have water here in this case, but it doesn't have to be water. Some have lava, some you could do something completely different with if you wanted to. And then it has this column that is not animated, or like not animated in the same way, in the way with the 3 different ones. And same with this column over here, and then it has this other section of 3 more. So I'll open the manual in a little bit and I'll show you exactly how these, like what each one of these things means, but I'll just still go back through these tiles first. So here's A2, which we were already looking at. A4, because there's no A3 tiles for the inside tile set, which is what I'm using, but I will show you A3 tiles. So these ones, these A4 tiles, these have standard auto tiles at the top, and then below each row this has a wall. So basically this is the top of a wall and this is like the front of the wall, which you probably know if you've played around with how they work in RPG Maker. And so these are slightly different auto tiles because this doesn't have the top parts here. And then A5, these are just regular tiles. So these, just as I showed at the beginning, these just tile normally. They're not auto tiles. Okay. Now, if I go through, here is the outside A3 tiles, and these ones, as you can see, these are all just squares. They do not have like the auto tiles that I was showing before with the 6 different squares. These are just a 4x4, if you want to think of it that way. And so let me show you what those look like in here. That is just for a house. I realize this is getting kind of messy with all this stuff. So this is just if you want to make a house with a really giant roof, and it also puts the shadow on there. But here I added my little template thing on here, and so if I make the same basic thing, which looks weird because it's both the same tiles, So this looks basically just like the regular auto tile that I had up here, but the difference is if I start trying to do weird shapes like the plus sign, it's actually gonna not put those green, elbow joints in, and so these look like they're overlapping in weird ways, and because you're not supposed to actually use these like that. But I can show you, here is what it looks like in here. And so the other thing you'll notice here is that with the A2 tiles and A1 tiles, you actually have to create a thumbnail for it, which, like I said, can be different. But with this, it's just this square, and it doesn't have those extra parts up here, and there's no thumbnail, so it actually just generates a thumbnail for you. So if you look over here on the left side, it just makes the thumbnail based on those four corners, just what this would look like if you drew a single square. And so it's kind of interesting that it does that here, but it doesn't do it with the auto tiles, the full auto tiles, the A2 tiles. And maybe that's just to give you more flexibility with what you show in your thumbnail, and also just because there's room, so they figured why not, maybe. I don't know. Okay, so now counters. These are a little bit different and a little bit weird. And so these are what counters look like in the RTP. And the purpose of counters. So you have to actually go here into your tile sets in your database, and you click on the counter tab, and you'll see that these ones, these are how I have it. You can make any of them counters, of course. These ones are marked as counters. And what that attribute does is it lets you talk to a character on the other side of a counter. If it's one, it has to be one tile width. If you make a counter that's an entire like big table like this, you can't talk all the way across it. It has to just be a single width like this. And the other thing that does, if you look at my cursor here, or if I switch it over so you can see the grid lines kind of, this is actually overlapping. And you can see that easily with this green line that I drew across. You'll see that these actually overlap onto the green. And that's something that's kind of subtle, and you might not notice it normally unless you've read the manual or you're really looking closely or doing something weird like this. But so look at the way that this auto tile works. Now it's actually cutting up that gray section. So on the left here I have the standard auto tile that's not set to a counter, and on the right I have this one over here that I made as a counter. So you'll see, yeah, it's kind of strange. It's cutting off the gray, and it's also cutting off this red with the white arrow, and then also the green it's cutting off over here. So you actually have to think about that if you're going to make a counter. And the other weird thing about this is that it only does that, so that's actually 8 pixels, by the way, that it's shifting it down, extending it down. And you can only do that to this, like the right side of the right half of these A2 tiles. If you do it to the left side here, and I can actually just show you by turning on the counter attribute on my regular auto tile. So now you'll see that it still does not overlap the green, but now it is doing that weird thing where it's cutting off parts of it, but it's not overlapping. So it's actually now cutting off the bottom, which is very strange. But basically, yeah, you're just not supposed to do that with these tiles, because these are supposed to be background tiles. Like, these are supposed to be ground tiles. So, they don't expect you to ever be doing that, and I guess that's why. So now let's take a look at the help file, which is under contents. and click on the first one, reference material, resource standards. Of course, you can search for it too. And we'll scroll down a bit and you'll see tile sets here. And sorry if this isn't completely in view. So you can read, you can and you should read this whole thing. But I'll quickly go through some of this. So as you can see, it does give you kind of a diagram about how this works, but it's not very clear. And so they're talking about set A and then groups. So A tiles, group 1, so A1 tiles, and then they have group 2, A2 tiles. But then they also refer to A, B on here, so it's a little easy to get confused here, but anyway. So here are the water tiles. Well, the A1 tiles, they don't necessarily have to be water like you see here. They have snow and lava, but these are the animated tiles. I'll come back to that. So I have these set as area type in the database, in the tile sets, but you can also be set to field type. And so there are some differences here, so you should read through that depending on what you're doing. And here it does mention the counter attribute with the 8 pixels offset downwards. And since we're still talking about counters, actually, I'll just show you that these are counters. This is that counter from the RTP, and you'll see that if I zoom way in, they actually did not make it seamless. You can actually see like an implied line, it's not an actual line, but just where the pattern breaks up and goes on to another, another part of the pattern. You can see that there's actually a line that goes across, which you really don't notice looking at it normal, from the normal percentage. But when you zoom way in here, then you can actually see it a little bit. So yeah, they actually didn't really do anything different there. If you're using some really wild pattern, really bold pattern, then maybe it would stand out. But with this, everything is so light in contrast to each other that you don't really notice it. And by the way, if it wasn't clear, the reason they offset this downward is because that way when your character walks up to it, it actually looks like your character's overlapping it and is talking to someone on the other side. Whereas I use Mac characters, so they're actually bigger than that, and so they're going to overlap no matter what, so it's not really that big of a difference. And then also if you look, so on the left side I have regular tiles, and I just threw some objects on there, and they just barely fit. This is just all from the RTP, because they fill up the entire tile. But then if I put it on a counter, even with that extension, it doesn't extend it all the way, as you can kind of see. If you look really closely, there's still a bit of the front of the counter is on that top part of the tile, so it actually looks like some of this stuff is overlapping. So yeah, just something to be aware of. Now let's go back to the help file, and so this has the sizes that you should make it, although it's also easy to just take the RTP files into Photoshop or GIMP or whatever you use, and then just draw over them, or just delete the actual image but keep the size of it, and that way you can just be sure that you're using the right size. So let's see. So let's talk about these A1 tiles again. So you'll see that these are labeled A, B, C, D, and E's, and it's kind of all over the place, and that's not something you would realize on your own probably. So it's pretty important that you read this if you're going to be making these tiles. And So if I go into this, and this is very confusing, I know, I just took my regular tiles up here. So this is basically like shallow water, and then deep water is kind of what these are replacing. So I just took my normal template and then colored it differently. So if you look here, you'll see that this shallow water has this edge on it. Also, if I drew it here, you just see it just looks normal. Has like the border all the way around it, and it has the border here, but it doesn't have the border here when it's next to this waterfall thing or this one, and it doesn't have the border when it's next to this tile. And this deep water tile is what is under B. That's the only B tile if you look. That's the only one labeled B. And what it says for B is that autotiles used for deep oceans. Only tiles in this block can create border lines for ocean tiles when they are adjacent to group 1 tiles. The transparent color portion of this block, mine doesn't have transparency, but the RTP does, is automatically complemented by block A tiles. As with block A, they can be animated. And these blocks are impassable by boats. So it's a little unclear what they're talking about there, but if we look, there's something very subtle that you might not notice at first, which is that this tile I can put here, and it doesn't create that border. But and the same is true with like this one here. And if I move this green section down, you'll notice something different happens, which is that this green is not creating a border on the shallow water, and it's also not creating this border here up at the top. But you'll notice that the deep water doesn't have that same effect on this tile here, if that makes sense. So this deep water is only affecting the shallow water, basically. The deep water is not affecting this tile. And so if I go like this, you'll see that this has this like wooden border all the way around this pool. And if I draw this blue, this deep water in here, or if I draw the shallow water in here, this border is still there. But if I draw this waterfall, now that border is actually gone. But so again, notice that these are having different effects on the shallow water. And yeah, so that's a very subtle distinction that you should be aware of. And if this doesn't exactly make sense with my tiles, but if I go here and I'll change it back to the standard tiles that they use, now you can see the deep water. So now this kind of makes more sense, because the deep water should be it should still have a border on this one if there's deep water next to it, but it should not have a border with the shallow water. And the border with the shallow water is just at the top. So as you'll see here, with the shallow water put inside here, it's kind of creating this pool, and there's this wall in the background, but that's inside the water tile. And I can actually play test this and show you what it looks like animated. I haven't changed passability on this, so I can walk all over this. But so yeah, so you'll see that that's kind of the difference there. And you don't really notice any animation going on with like the deep water here, but with other tile sets you would. So I hope that part made sense. And anyway, you should, as I said, read this help file, because they go over what all this stuff is. And even though it's not very clear, you can always test it out yourself and see how they all interact with each other if you need to, if you are making tiles for those. But also you could just kind of stick to the way that they seem to use them, and you'll probably be okay. And then also, I didn't mention that these e-tiles are animated, like those waterfalls. So those are animated in a slightly different way, and those are not. Anyway, you can read what it says here. So I hope all of that makes sense, and you can download this file, the actual tile that I made. You can download it from my site, along with some other files I'll put up there. I'll put the water tiles up there too, which I actually did animate a little bit, just so you can play around with them if you want. And so you can actually import them into your RPG Maker, and you can do this same thing. You can draw whatever weird shapes you want. So I hope this was clear. I think just looking at this image, which I'll also just put a big image of this up that you can download just as a reference if you want, so that you don't even have to import it into RPG Maker. You can just look at it. I think this makes it a bit easier to see what's going on here. Although again, trying to wrap your head around like which parts have to tile with other parts and stitch together with other parts of it is still confusing. But like I said, in part 3, I will show you exactly how to do it and what order to do it in, so you don't have to actually worry about that at all. So I hope to see you in the next videos. Thanks. I realize I can't actually see you, but in the comments section, maybe I'll see you there. All right.